Welcome back to another episode, all. Recently, I did an episode about the National Council on Severe Autism with two psychiatrists and Jill Escher, both claiming that they don't understand of why autism is a spectrum, going from people who may have the inability to speak, who are very debilitated, who are not able to use the toilet by themselves, all the way across to people who can be fully qualified PhDs who can live independently, and they didn't seem to know why it's become a spectrum. So I'm going to explain throughout this video why and how. First of all, autism became seen as a thing in 1911. At first, seen as a milder form of schizophrenia that children had. Then, when we got to 1943, in the US, someone called Leo Connor, who the psychiatrists were talking about, identified 11 children as autistic and was making reports about them, saying things like, they go getting lost in their own world, they can't do this and they can't do that. And he placed all the blame on the mothers. And it's now called the refrigerator mother theory, he called them, saying that the cause of autism is mothers not loving their children enough, not interacting with their children, but the children freeze. And at this time, we also had Hans Asperger all the way across in Austria, but instead he was identifying autistic kids just like the ones that Leo Connor identified, but he was also finding ones who had the ability to speak, who were not as debilitated, but who were more like myself, who were more like me, who could speak, who could read, who didn't have as many difficulties, didn't have as many issues to overcome. And they're wondering, these three and these two psychiatrists, where's the connection there? Why are all of these now called autism and no one questions it? And as I said, that really amused me when I found them saying that. All the reports which Hans Asperger made were rather buried deep down in the literature. So not many people had access to what Hans Asperger had to say of how he was calling his autistic patients things like little professor. But at the same time, we've now found that Hans Asperger was an active Nazi and participated in the Nazi Holocaust, actually sending those who were like the ones Leo Connor described. He sent all of them who he thought would not be employable. He sent them to the Nazis, but he rather preserved the ones who he thought could become employable altogether. But all of this was buried inside the literature at the time, so we only knew about Connor syndrome. So at the time, we only had Connor syndrome and autistic disorder. But then the part of where the bridge comes in is when we get to the 1980s. In 1980, someone called Lornna Wing, she really challenged what Leo Connor had to say, because she had an autistic daughter and actually thought that Leo Connor placing all the blame on her was plain thick and stupid. And she had a husband who had the ability to translate German to English. So what Lornna Wing and her husband did was they translated Hans Asperger's papers, and they found out that autism does go to this great length. And then the way Lornna Wing bridged them both together was she worked with the American Psychiatric Association together, the ones who designed the DSMs and so on. And she made what she calls the Triad of Impairments, is what she called it, where all autistic people have a difficulty with social communication, social interaction, and social imagination, or theory of mind. And she said that this seems to be what all autistic people have in common. And if you actually look at the diagnostic criteria, you find that section 1 or section A is all about the triad of impairments. And so at the time in the 1990s, that's why Asperger syndrome was added to the DSM on the DSM 4th edition in 1994. after Lornna Wing had dug up and translated Hans Asperger's work. So this triad of impairments is what digs them all together as one spectrum. But in recent years, we've had the double empathy studies, which have shown that the triad of impairments is rather debunked now and is a partial explanation at best. Because we do see that there seems to be two different communication styles between autistic and non-autistic people, and that the interaction and communications are two-directional difficulty, but both have a difficulty understanding each other altogether. So look, that's what was bridged. All the work from Hans Asperger, from these little professors who grow up with PhDs, employable, and bridges it all the way across from Connors syndrome, autistic disorder, child disintegrative disorder, autistic disorder, and Asperger syndrome. That's what bridged them all together. As I've said many times, I've been researching autism for about 25 years nearly. I've been in the world of autism for over 2 decades. When I first began researching autism in the 90s, in the late 90s, each time I looked up a page about autism on the internet, it had autism and Asperger syndrome written about separately. So I could see that there was debate on, is Asperger syndrome actually a form of autism or is it not? So there was still debate among the autism researchers of whether Asperger syndrome is a form of autism. But by the time we got to 2013, out of all the autism research they had done, I could not find a distinction between all the ones from what Leo O'Connor explained to all the ones that Hans Asperger was explaining. They couldn't find any clear distinction between them. As the children developed and so on, they developed abilities that they didn't have when they were younger, and they turned out employable, even though they were the very ones Leo O'Connor was explaining, and the ones who Hans Asperger was explaining, sometimes they regressed and rather got less better as they grew, and lost some of their abilities, like losing the ability to speak. So they lost some of their skills as they aged, but some from Leo O'Connor's end, well, what we called end of the spectrum at that time, is they gained more abilities and became better than those more talented with Asperger syndrome. So they couldn't find any clear distinction whatsoever, but they turned it into one spectrum, which has multiple dimensions, multiple continuums, but it's not just a linear line with a scale from 1 to 10 going from least autistic to most autistic. That's all out together now. It's more like you've probably seen other autistic people make videos showing some kind of circle, some kind of color wheel, and saying that a color wheel represents autism in a better way. And I would actually agree with them that it does. So you found by its Lornna Wing in the 1980s by making the triad of impairments. That's what's bridged all the autistic people from all the way from Asperger syndrome all the way down to Connors syndrome. But that's what bridged it all together to produce it into a spectrum. If you found this episode interesting, it would be appreciated if you would hit like and hit subscribe and help spread the information so more people are aware that autism actually is more diverse. It is more diverse than it was originally thought by Leo O'Connor. If you made it this far, thank you for listening.